Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Skyblock News. I'm your host, Derailious, and today we're going to be going over the Loadouts update as well as the Hypixel Skyblock resource pack currently on the Alpha network. Before we begin, make sure to like and subscribe. Use code RAIL on the Hypixel store for 5% off your order, and without any further ado, let's get started. Let's begin with the Skyblock resource pack, which is currently force enabled on the Alpha network. You will need to be on version 1.21.11 or higher in order to play on the network, and they're dropping support for 1.21.9 and 1.21.10 soon. They're also going to be dropping support for 1.21.11, so migrate to 26.1 or 26.2. And as you can see, here is the resource pack on a few different items. Personally, after experiencing the resource pack, I can kind of divide my feedback into two separate portions. In terms of items, anything that's not a weapon or a major piece of equipment, I think they did a pretty great job. The Dwarven minerals look great, gemstones look incredible for the most part. I'm really a big fan of a lot of the Crystal Hollows items. The Forge items look really solid. Anything fishing related is just really cool. Pretty much anything that isn't a weapon looks really solid. In terms of the weapons, I think the majority of those look pretty solid as well. The Halberd of the Shredded, I think, is a really bright spot of this update. It looks absolutely incredible. I love it, but I've got to say there are a few items that I think aren't great. For example, the Aspect of the Void, in my view, doesn't really match what I would imagine it would look like. It's just a purple sword, which is kind of strange. Terminator as well, I feel like, could use a little bit more work. The good news is the team is willing to hear feedback from the player base about certain items. If there is an item that you cannot stand, that you think looks good or bad, talk about it underneath the forum thread listed down below. The team will be taking into account your feedback. Note that because of this update, a lot of the items in Skyblock have been set to be paper in order to make them much harder to dupe, or just generally to make exploits a lot less possible, which is fundamentally a fine thing to do, but it will make the process of setting up a mod in the future that changes the textures back a lot harder. Not impossible, but just more difficult. So it seems like any sort of mod that allows you to remove the resource pack if you don't want it will be out of reach, at least for the time being, although I imagine players will get one set up fairly quickly after the update. A couple other things to note: future updates will include updates to the resource pack, as well as all of their items will be textured according to the team, except for pets and cosmetics. Pets will be worked on in the future as well. It's just not something they're able to get out immediately. Note that this is an alpha approved version of the resource pack. It's not finalized. If you have a problem with it, talk about it to the team. Another positive I've got to say is I like the way that they did all of the background GUIs when you hover over items. It looks really, really clean, and all of the different colors are significantly better than the base colors in my view. I think it just looks better as a whole. Another thing to note, the custom menus that were shown off a few years back will be coming. They're just not coming immediately. Next, we have to go over the loadout system, which is pretty much brand new. If you click on it, you'll be met with a lot of different menus, and it can get confusing, but I promise it's not that bad. First, let's start with our armor. This is the normal wardrobe. You can go through, you can take out and put in whatever you would like, you can pull out gear, you can put gear back in. It works the exact same as the old wardrobe system. Note that whenever you equip gear, it does just get put on. So, as you can see, there is my gear. Next, we have the equipment wardrobe system. This works exactly the same as the wardrobe, but for equipment. You can put on whatever you would like, you can swap around stuff, so on and so forth. Note that at the beginning of the alpha, there was a 30-second cooldown on pretty much any action within the wardrobes, as well as the loadout system as a whole. That has since been removed, and now there is just a 30-second cooldown on swapping out your Heart of the Forest and Heart of the Mountain trees, which we'll go over in a minute. Notably, you also have your pet slot. You can put on whatever you would like. And then on top of that, we have our Power Stone. You can swap this around to whatever you would like once again. And your stats tuning. Note that there is a bug with my mod, but it does work the way you would expect. So, on top of that, we have our Heart of the Mountain as well as Heart of the Forest tree. You'll have to buy these extra slots seemingly with gems. I believe it's 150 gems each. But if you have multiple slots, works the exact same way. You could just swap between stuff, but only once every 30 seconds. And then we have the loadout system on the right. Everything I just explained you could use independently of each other. You could swap out your gear without swapping out your equipment. But what if you have a setup that you want to use consistently and you want to swap to in just one click? Well, you can right click to edit a loadout. You can put on whatever you would like. This, for example, will be my foraging setup. I note the trims here are just from a mod. It's not something included as part of the update. Then I can put on my Jade Dragon. I can go to my Heart of the Forest slots. I can go to slot 1. I could use the Power Stone. Let's just use Hurtful. And we can use this tuning with some speed, sure. We can rename it to be Foraging. And if I go back and I left click, boom, the entire equipment setup, as well as my armor and my pet and my Power Stone, has been put on. Let's set up a combat setup now. We can go in, we grab our Crimson, we'll grab our combat equipment, we'll grab our Golden Dragon. We don't really need a Heart of the Mountain or Heart of the Forest slot. We'll go into Power Stone, we'll put on Hurtful, and we'll use a different tuning setup. We could rename this to Combat Main. And if I left click, boom, there we go. Note that if you have none on for Heart of the Mountain or Heart of the Forest, it doesn't remove your Heart of the Mountain or Heart of the Forest tree. It just doesn't change it from what you have currently equipped. So you don't really need to worry about that. That's not going to be a huge problem for the most part. I believe that generally works for loadouts as a whole. So if I right click the loadout and I put on a pet that's different, like my Ammonite, I could just call this Ammonite. And then I right click, or rather left click, on the Ammonite setup, yeah, it just changes my pet without changing anything else. I believe that works for pretty much anything, except in a kind of niche case I want to go over now. If I go over to armor that has a setup here, but isn't completely full, like it has a chest plate and leggings that aren't included, when I put this on, it puts on this wardrobe slot. It doesn't keep into account the fact that I had, these two pieces on prior. So if you're wanting to swap out specific individual pieces, you will probably still need to hold on to them in your inventory like you had to in the past. You won't be able to just easily swap out one or two armor pieces. You'll have to go into your profile, take it off, and then, swap out stuff. But aside from that, this loadout system is pretty all-encompassing, very easy to use, and I think it's very nice in this current state. At Elizabeth, you can find the equipment wardrobe slots, as well as the loadout slots, the Heart of the Mountain bonus configuration slots, and same thing for the Heart of the Forest. If you go into your loadouts, you can see you can have up to 5 Heart of the Forest slots, 5 different Heart of the Mountain slots. You have 9 base equipment wardrobe slots, and that can go up to 18, at least at MVP++. And at MVP++, you also get 18 loadout slots that can go up to 27. So there is quite a lot of customizability already there for you, but note you will need to get those additional Heart of the Mountain and Heart of the Forest slots if you want more. And just to further clarify, you can still go over to your profile at the top part of your Skyblock menu and individually take off and put on pretty much any piece of gear you would like. This is entirely separate from the loadouts and wardrobe systems. Next up, we have to head over to the Hypixel forums for a few pieces of information. First, once again, they have reduced the cooldown from the wardrobe, equipment wardrobe, power stones, and tuning points from 30 seconds back to 0 seconds. This caused a lot of outrage when it first happened on the alpha network. I'm very glad to see them backtrack on this quickly. It seems like it was a purely dependent on player feedback change. They realized there were a lot of situations a 30-second cooldown applied to everything would cause a ton of issues. They still think a Heart of the Mountain and Heart of the Forest cooldown is necessary. I think that's fine. I don't see a world in which players are going to want to swap around their trees more than every 30 seconds. I think that is completely reasonable at the moment. In terms of the Skyblock resource pack, here it is. As you can see, it looks fairly solid. There is an FAQ. We pretty much went over all of this here, but once again, the team is open to feedback from the community. There's also a few other additional changes. Notably, There is a visual cooldown on Enderman Slayer sword abilities. There is a visual cooldown between shortbow shots. They made watering cans show their water level as a durability meter. They updated several item abilities to use item display entities and improved their animations. This affects the Bone Meringue, Tribal Spear, Flower of Truth, Bouquet of Lies, Halberd of the Shredded, Giant Sword, Time Shuriken, and Extremely Real Shuriken. They applied a unique tooltip texture to each item rarity, that's the little outline at the edge of each item. They updated the arrow hotbar display to show the texture of the arrow type you're using, which is very nice, and they hid the empty tooltip on glass pane UI elements in the Forge. For the various other loadout changes, they increased the default amount of wardrobe slots from 2 to 4. They made the first tuning template free, refunding everyone that spent bits on it previously. They added community upgrades for the loadouts, Heart of the Forest, Heart of the Mountain, and equipment slots, and they removed the full set first worn line from the wardrobe. And last, we have a lot of healing revamp changes. For those who don't remember, there was a major update to healing on the Alpha Network. I highly recommend you look at the last video covering it. There is a lot to go over in that video. I won't be able to cover it all here. But as you can see, they have made their first round of adjustments. Notably, most mobs have had their damage reduced by 10%. The exceptions are, there's a 15% reduction for the Floor 4 and M4 boss animal minions, including the Spirit Bear. There's a 20% reduction on Sedan's Giants, Sedan's Golems, the Crypt Lurker, the Scarf Boss's minions, the Skeleton Master, Skeletor, Skeletor Prime, the Spirit Chicken, the Super Archer, and the Zombie Commander. There is a 25% reduction on Terracottas, the Frozen Adventurer, and the Shadow Assassin, and a 30% reduction on Fells. Blaze Slayer has been reduced by about 25%, and its mini-bosses have been reduced by a lot. And Enderman Slayer has been reduced by 30%, and its mini-bosses have also been reduced by a lot. Broken Heart Radiation now deals 800 true damage instead of a percentage of your health. Note that they are aware of the request for wanting to be healed after fighting a boss, as the boss leaves you at low HP. This is still probably needed after the damage reductions, according to a lot of people that I talked to, especially on Blaze, or if you're cocooning a boss, you could be at like 30 or 40% HP, the second boss will spawn. Not a good look. It does need to be changed. Probably just heal people whenever they're fighting a Slayer and the boss dies. Heal them back to full, let them go into that second fight completely fresh. The other big changes to cover include the explosive arrow change, in which they no longer damage yourself, which is nice to see, some dungeon clash changes, notably related to how vitality and mending scale as part of your base stats, as well as some Crimson Isle mini-boss adjustments. Notably, Ashfang has been made a whole lot better. It now heals 500k per absorbed blaze instead of 2 million. Its gravity orb now deals 7,500 damage per second instead of one-shotting the player. And the HP of the blaze has been reduced to 2 million. Similar changes have been made to the other Crimson Isle mini-bosses, and there are more changes, especially damage changes, they are considering for the healing revamp in the future, such as various instances of ability damages that aren't defined by a mob's base damage stat, the lava fishing mini-bosses, Kudra, Diana mobs if necessary, and more item adjustments if needed. Wrapping up here, I've got to say, aside from the issues with the 30-second cooldown, now that everything is resolved, I think the loadout system looks incredibly solid. I think definitely there could be some more work done on the resource pack. Some stuff looks a little bit unfinished, but overall it's a solid step in the right direction if the team is going to make one. I hope in the future the team gives players who don't want to use the resource pack an ability to opt out somehow, whether that be through a pack they release that reverts all of the textures or whatever else. I think it would be really nice to see. I get that the team is trying to use a lot of new textures in upcoming content, but at the same time, players want the ability to have choice on this one. Hopefully the team does listen. Would love to hear your thoughts about this update down below. Look to the future, fellas. I'll see you then.